There's still a lot of talk about the international incident which embarrassed Canada when a 98-year-old man who served with the Nazi Waffen SS in the Second World War was celebrated as a war hero on Parliament Hill. And it took place around the same time that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed Parliament. Now, to chat about this debacle in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Now, Brian, many are calling for House Speaker Anthony Rota, who invited the 98-year-old Jaroslav Hunka to resign. The NDP and Bloc have said that Rota needs to step down, but not the Conservatives or Liberals.
There's been plenty came forward and said he's got to go. And look, you can't survive when you've got cabinet ministers like Karina Gould, the Liberal House leader, saying he's got to go. Minister of Foreign Affairs, Melanie Joly, saying he has to go. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau asked about it and saying, well, Mr. Rota should think about what he's done. Those were all signs that, Rota was not going to have the support of MPs. And, when you are speaker, you serve at the pleasure of your fellow MPs. It's not an appointment. You actually have to win an election. And in a minority parliament, you have to win election across party lines. And Anthony Rota was successful in doing that, at the beginning of this parliament for the last two. But it has not been easy over these last few days.
So, Brian, who would have been responsible once again for making sure that this individual Hunka was vetted properly?
I think there's dual responsibility for both the speaker and for the prime minister and his office. Look, from a security point of view, things have changed. It used to be that the speaker was solely responsible for security. In fact, I remember the days when there was a House of Commons police force and a Senate police force. They were separate. They reported to the respective speakers. Now there's the Parliamentary Protective Services branch, which reports to the RCMP, which reports to the government. And there's even a memorandum of understanding signed by the Speaker of the House, the Speaker of the Senate, the RCMP, and the Minister of Public Safety making those changes. And those were brought in after the 2014 terrorist attack. So there is a government angle to this. It's not just the Speaker the way it has been for decades and decades past. There's also the political side. This was a wartime leader coming to address the Canadian Parliament in a joint session. He's a man who is wanted. The Russians would love to take him out, would love to see Volodymyr Zelensky killed. And so you've got to be looking at who's there from a security standpoint, but also is there anyone there who could embarrass him? Because in the end, that's what this has done. And you've got Russia going around saying, see, we told you there were Nazis. Now they're celebrating them.
And this week, Pierre Poilievre called for the House to condemn the incident and the government, while the Liberals asked to have the incident erased?
Yeah, two competing motions looking for unanimous consent in the House of Commons. Pierre Poilievre asked for the incident to be condemned, but also called for the government to be condemned. And of course, when you put language like that in there, you know that government MPs are not going to vote to condemn their own party, their own government. But so he did that just before question period. And I quite frankly think both the incident and the government do need to be condemned. The speaker already has been by all sides. The speaker, apologized on Monday, but the government's not taking any responsibility. So I think Poilievre was right. So he put that forward just before question period on Monday. The Liberals said no and asked for unanimous consent. Right after question period, Karina Gould, the Liberal House leader, stands up and asks for unanimous consent to strike the comments honoring Mr. Hunka from the parliamentary debates. So the debates is the official record, often called Hansard, and they wanted that removed so that it looked like it never happened. Beyond that, she wanted any multimedia, any video, any audio recordings of this deleted as well. I mean, that is changing history. That is right up there with saying we got to burn the record so that we can't acknowledge this happened. The Conservatives said no to that, and several of them gave speeches explaining why. So, look, this has just been handled badly from beginning to end by the Trudeau government. He's got one headache piled on top of the other at a time when he had a full plate of headaches before this all came out.
Brian, there's still tension as well between Canada and its spat with India over the killing of Sikh separatist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar, June 18th in Surrey, British Columbia. It's been more than a week since the allegation that India was involved in the killing of Nijjar. Where do we stand now?
We have nothing more coming forward. We've just had back and forth between the Trudeau government and the Modi government in India. The Trudeau government saying, well, look, we want your help with this investigation. India says, fine, show us some information. You haven't given us anything. We've got the opposition parties, all of them saying, okay, we'll back you, but we need to see some evidence. We need to see something that you're basing this claim on. And that hasn't happened. Now, I've called for some evidence to be released, Hal. I've been told that that's taking a position in support of India. I don't think so. If the government has evidence, they've already made the accusation public. If they have evidence and they put it forward, it doesn't have to be the whole case, but part of it, that would force the Modi government's hand. They'd have to respond. It would also give greater pressure, add greater pressure to our allies like the Americans, the Australians, the Brits, to step forward with strong comments. Remember, they haven't made strong comments. They've said things like they have deep concern. That's not much stronger than saying, well, thoughts and prayers. It's something people say, but there isn't necessarily an action behind it. And that's kind of where our allies are at. So putting some evidence forward, I think, would help. They haven't done that. And, the Indian media continue to mock Canada, to take Canada on, to put out more information about Hardeep Singh Najjar and say, see, this is why it's all right that he was killed. It's almost as if they're saying they did it. And you've got the Canadian government just standing idly by while they're attacked in the Indian media, biggest English-speaking media market in the world.
Brian, the Alberta government is claiming more than half of the Canada Pension Plan, around $343 billion, as its own. Premier Daniel Smith says before our province even thinks about leaving the CPP for an Alberta pension plan, a referendum must be held on the subject. What would negotiations look like between Alberta and Ottawa if our province wanted to opt out?
Well, I think that, Quebec already runs its own pension plan. I'm not one of these Eastern Canadians or Central Canadians who sits there and says, tut, 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 what do they think they are in Alberta? They can't have their own pension plan. Quebec already has one. Sure, Alberta's been in the Canada Pension Plan for a long time. It would be messy. Constitutionally, it is provincial purview, although that was surrendered at the time of the creation of the CPP. So court-wise, maybe there'd be a fight. But, if they end up leaving, if Alberta says we're going to go, then there would be tough negotiations because I'll tell you that there is a solid argument for Alberta to get more out of the CPP than just a per capita apportionment. Higher incomes, younger population, all of these things, higher participation rate for both men and women for most of the last several decades. So yeah, there's an argument to get more, but for a population of just about 5 million to claim more than half, that would not sit well. And I don't think the math would back it up, even with those other factors that I just mentioned. So I think it's an opening salvo by Danielle Smith in negotiations that haven't even started yet.
Brian, last week there were rallies held across the country in support of 1 million March for Children. Now, for the most part, things were fairly peaceful. I mean, there was the odd tussle here and there with a number of counter-protesters, but the rhetoric from the federal Liberals appeared quite openly hostile towards parents. That can't be a good move, considering that the Tories have, like a 10% lead right now in the polls?
And it's going to alienate groups that have voted for them in the past. I don't know what the rallies were like where you are, but I was at the one in the center of Toronto, in Queen's Park at the legislature. I did think there was going to be serious violence at one point because the small tussles looked like they were going to break out, but full kudos to Toronto police who did a great job keeping the two opposing sides apart. But, I saw turban Sikh fathers at the rally. I saw Muslim mothers in their hijabs at the rally. I saw people from all backgrounds at the rally saying, leave our kids alone. The Trudeau government turned around and said, these are hate-filled rallies. This is a hateful position. The Muslim Association of Canada, which has been close to the Trudeau government at times over the years, they've come out with a statement blasting all politicians, but in particular the Prime Minister, for their characterization of parents. Look, I think there are extremes on both sides, but I think most sensible Canadians could sit down and figure out how to do this, how to deal with this issue in a way that respects parents, in a way that respects students who are dealing with issues, in a way that doesn't put teachers in a bind. I mean, I know I've heard from teachers who look at the policies that are currently in place in some schools and say, this is really uncomfortable for me. So I think there are ways to do it, but the Trudeau government has taken an extremist position on this issue. And we know that because of the polling done by the Angus Reid Institute, which shows even more support for parents' rights than was shown in the Leger poll that was done back in May. And that's after months of being told that parental rights is controversial. Support went up. So I think that they run a real risk of alienating core groups of voters for them, alienating parents across the political spectrum. And I don't think it's a good idea. I think it causes more division. It will inflame passions and create hate that may not have been there otherwise.
You know, a lot of the rallies stemmed around the SOGI, or the sexual orientation gender identity, that's being implemented in schools now. It's not actual curriculum from the province here in Alberta, but it's a resource or a tool that students can access. So that's kind of the controversy surrounding that around SOGI. What have you been hearing?
It's mostly around those issues. I heard from a lot of parents last week saying that the way some of the school boards want to push the issue, that it causes confusion, it upsets students, and especially in the younger years, that this is just simply not appropriate. I think that most sensible parents and educators and folks could just sit down and sort this out. But it's being driven by an extremist ideology. Let's not reply to it with a different extremism. Let's just deal with it in a common sense way, the way most Canadians, I think, are fully capable of doing.
Brian, we've heard the expression "axe the tax" for quite some time from the Conservative Party of Canada. Pierre Poilievre has been harping on this for quite some time now. Is there any talk by the Trudeau government of potentially eliminating the federal carbon tax to help give Canadians a much-needed break right now?
Sadly, no. But what's funny is, of course, this was just implemented in Atlantic Canada. And a week later, the clean fuel standards took effect again in Atlantic Canada, and there were huge spikes in gas prices. Well, that has led to a huge drop in support in the public opinion polls for the Liberals. So Liberal MPs from Atlantic Canada are now saying, well, can you give our region a carve out? Can you just exempt us? And, I can't see them doing, well, actually, I could see them doing it for political reasons, but then that would anger the rest of the country. That would anger voters in Ontario who are subject to the provincial backstop, or sorry, the federal backstop. It would anger voters in Saskatchewan and Alberta, where the Liberals don't get a lot of support, but they do need the support in Ontario. It wouldn't actually impact British Columbia because they have their own, so they're not under the federal tax. So it's kind of an odd hodgepodge, but that's the only thing that I've heard is Atlantic Canadian Liberal MPs trying to say, boss, you gotta cut that. You gotta axe that tax in Atlantic Canada, or we're getting the axe.
Brian, yeah, are we going to go to the polls anytime soon? Or is Jagmeet Singh going to hang in there supporting the coalition until the year 2025, when he gets his full pension?
I can't see the Liberals wanting to go to the polls right now. You've got the India debacle, you've got the Nazi debacle, you've got support falling in the polls before that, you've got, there was one poll. Now, I don't believe this poll. Frank Graves from Ecos put out a poll of just 600 people that claimed Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives were at 42% and the Trudeau Liberals were at 22%. I don't buy that poll for a minute, but if things keep up, maybe we'll get there eventually. There's no reason that Trudeau or Singh would want to go to the polls at the moment. And so Singh's not going to back a non-confidence motion. He's not going to pull his support. His party would be obliterated along with the Trudeau Liberals. And so you've just got the Bloc and the Conservatives who might want one. And it they don't have the votes to try and force an election. So I think Trudeau's going to try and wait things out, try to get the poll numbers up a little higher than they are now, which it wouldn't be hard for them to be higher than what they are for him. He's in the basement. And do expect that there will be some leveling out. A 14, 15, 12-point lead for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, that will be difficult for him to sustain over the long run. Not saying it won't happen, but just remember, voters are fickle and they'll go up and down depending on what they see in the news on any given day. But I wouldn't expect better polls for Justin Trudeau based on the news of the last week.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thanks.